Welcome again to Lakeshore Focus, a weekly show highlighting the key issues, important events, and interesting people in our region. I'm Keith Kirkpatrick. Today's guest is a leader who has not only impacted our region, but our entire country. As a civil rights activist who worked alongside people who were jailed for their efforts, and he experienced a brush with death for standing up for his beliefs. He helped change lives and the course of history with his passion and commitment. I'm honored to welcome Richard Morrisroe. You're pretty impressive just to hear that introduction, don't you think?
Yes, thank you for having me, though. And you put the address together, the introduction.
Well, that's true. I didn't have you write it, right? So
That's
people
right.
will know you. That's your disclaimer. So you used to do a lot of these shows, evidently?
I did some back in the early 5-10 years after the occurrence, when I was still in Chicago.
Okay. Back when you were a young lad?
When I was a young lad, my early, mid-20s.
Okay. So you were very active in the civil rights movement, starting when? What year?
1964, 65. I had been assigned to a Black Catholic parish in Chicago South Side, and through a number of the parishioners became active of issues and often accompanied them to events in different parts of the city.
Now that's the time you were a Catholic priest at the time.
I was a Catholic priest, and I'd been ordained in April of 64 and was assigned to St. Columbanus Church in June of 64.
So how old were you then?
25 when I was assigned. I became 26 that following October.
Okay. And so that was, would you consider that at the height of the civil rights movement? Because the Civil Rights Act was signed in 64.
A lot was going on, had been going on. A lot went on after Dr. King's death in 68, but some kind of focused that period of 65 to 68 as being the eyes on the prize period, and often the videos stop at that point.
So did you volunteer to go down? I mean, did they turn to all the priests and say, who would like to go down? And
well, I volunteered to
south?
work in the Black Catholic parish. That was the volunteering,
Okay.
which came out of a period of doing construction work and working as an iron worker with black laborers who were not admitted to be members of their union. The Iron Workers Union was very discriminatory until 1968. At the time, the Justice Department changed it. And that experience working on Chicago's West Side, doing rod separation and sorting out, very much influenced me.
Now, where did this passion come from to kind of want to help right these wrongs? Because, I mean, out of all the Catholic priests, you could have been just said, I'll just go to a regular parish.
Well, there were others. There were 2 or 3 of my classmates who volunteered to work in Black Catholic parishes, and I think that was a result of perhaps the civil rights movement. But
where did that passion for you
well,
come
among other
from?
things, I had an aunt who worked for many years in South Africa and worked among certainly coloreds and had some experience. She was a teacher of the deaf, the hearing impaired, and had done that for 15, 20 years before I ever was in the seminary.
Wow.
So as a kid, I was growing up with a very international awareness.
So you're, I'm not sure I want to call it claim to fame, but I mean, what kind of put you out there is, I mean, you had this incident where you were shot, right?
Well, that had the bullet missed, would not have been history.
That you wouldn't have been doing any talk shows, right?
That's right.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened? I've read about this myself, but for our audience, I mean.
Well, what had happened was that I had been part of the March 1965 event in Selma. I was part of a number of people that really came out of a commitment of bishops and pastors and rabbis. In January of 1965, the National Conference on Religion and Race was held in Chicago. Cardinal Meyer, who later ordained me, was very much part of that, one of the co-chairmen. And a commitment was made of Catholic, Protestant, Jewish Orthodox to respond to Dr. King, and not just in words, but to commit to him in action.
So how many?
So 2 years later, when Selma occurred and the Pettus Bridge, he called in that commitment.
Okay, and how many of you went down there then?
Well, I was part of a busload of perhaps 25 Chicagoans who went, clergy, laymen, and
black and white mixed?
Black and white mixed, and coordinated through the Catholic Interracial Council, which was a local chapter of a national organization. as the young man who died when I was shot, Jonathan Daniels, was part of an Episcopal group that went from Boston.
So what was it like when you got off the bus down there? I mean, what was the atmosphere like in Selma during that
Well,
time?
we were tired, and we found a place to stay. And St. Elizabeth's, which was a Catholic church that had been there since 1937, founded to work in the black community, provided kind of a filter and sorting bin for those of us who went down, really people from all over the country. One of the very good expressions of it is a PBS film, Sisters of Selma, that focuses on how they got there from the St. Louis area and contrasted them with nuns from the St. Joseph, Rochester area who were not allowed to take part in the events.
So
There were people from all over the country, but the point being it was a kind of an institutional commitment rather than just individuals deciding I'm going to go to Selma.
So when you got off this bus and went toward the Catholic Church, I mean, was there like hundreds of people around there?
Well, there were dozens of
checking
people.
in? Okay.
And they'd been coming all that week. The Sunday event was followed by some people coming down right away. Our group went down the Thursday after, and we stayed there 10 days. The march was not authorized during that time. It was still being fought out in federal court, so that I left being part of some short marches to the courthouse, but not being part of the major march from Selma to Montgomery. That didn't occur until a week after I left.
So when did you get shot then? I mean, how did that happen?
Well, what had happened was I was part of the march event and went back to work with a strep throat and continued to work in St. Columba's Church, worked with youth groups, visited a lot of families during that summer, recall how much it meant to those families to have a pastor, whoever it was, visit them, and often to share their King James version of the Bible, which was different than the one I'd been reared on, but was still what they often had in their house, and read the Psalm of the Good Shepherd and find out how much rural, southern Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia meant to their families. So I had a chance in August that same summer to, I'd been marching in Chicago, had been to jail in June of 65 over the conditions of schools in Chicago and the amount of institutional segregation going on then. So my neighbor across the street, Sammy Rayner, one-time alderman, congressional candidate, invited me to go down to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King's organization, the organization that was begun after the Montgomery bus boycott. This was their 10th anniversary. And
you're like a walking history book.
Well, it was a very interesting time.
I mean,
and the conference was held in the park and across the street at the 16th Street Baptist Church, the church where the 4 young women portrayed in the movie Selma were blown to death in September of 1963. That church had been rebuilt and became the kind of house for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
So when did your, again, incident where you were just...
It happened. I was at that conference from Monday through Thursday, and through John Lewis, who had spoken in our church, now a congressman from Atlanta, introduced me to Jonathan Daniels, who was up from Selma. Selma's about 90 miles below Montgomery, below Birmingham, rather, where the conference was. And John was an Episcopal seminarian. He'd taken off a year or two in his, after graduation from Virginia Military Institute, and then went back to Boston Theological Seminary, the Episcopal Theological Seminary. Jonathan had come with a group of students in March and had stayed because he and Judy Upham, another seminarian with him, felt it was a shame that there were so many whites leaving, that they thought it was important to stay. And John became the point person for the Episcopal Society for Cultural and Racial Unity, ESCRU, maintaining its commitment to the civil rights efforts going on both in Selma and in the surrounding areas, including Lowndes County, where...
So you were with him a lot, sounds like.
I was with him for a day and a half. Then we went to jail for a week.
Okay.
So my traveling with Jonathan was rather limited.
What'd you get arrested for?
Arrested for demonstrating in Fort Deposit, Alabama. small rural county in Lowndes County, this rural county between Selma and Montgomery. Part of the march from Selma to Montgomery went through Lowndes County. Lowndes County was one of the places where the marchers stayed and camped and bivouacked.
Now, did you experience some of this violence that you see, you know? I mean, were they, you know,
Well,
the dogs and all this stuff?
I think I knew we weren't in friendly surroundings.
Okay.
How violent it was, I think I found out later after Tom Coleman's gunshot.
So you were going into a store or something?
We've been let out of jail after 6 days in jail.
Okay.
The county jail that we were transferred to. Hayneville is the county seat. We're going to a small store, cash store. We thought to get a pop, soda, whatever. And Coleman was in the doorway and threatened to get the hell out of here. I'll blow your head off. And he didn't wait very long.
Now, it was you and Jonathan and two women.
Yes, Ruby Sales, who was with Jonathan, Joyce Bailey, who was with myself.
And they were both black.
Both black.
Okay.
They were among 4 women who had been in jail for that same week.
Okay.
We had all been arrested in about 20, 25 people in Fort Deposit. Those who were underage were let go, and the rest of us, about 16 to 20 men, were in jail, and the 4 young women were on the floor below.
Did you try to come in or to the store then, or did you
Well,
walk away? Or?
The gunshot was in the doorway, so we didn't have much chance to go in the door. And barrel 1 of the 12-gauge shotgun instantly killed Jonathan. Barrel 2 caught me in the lower back about 20 yards away.
So you were moving to get out of there?
Trying to.
Okay. So this experience, and I know I've read about, you know, some things that happened with Jonathan and all kind of afterwards, but how have you been able to convey this to kind of the next generation and people? You've taught at the university at Calumet College for years, for 30 years, I think,
Many
right?
students have no awareness of this. Sometimes it comes up in a social justice class where I show them part of the video that National Public Radio put together in memory of Jonathan called Here I Am, Lord, Send Me, the story of Jonathan Daniels. So often I've shown half of that in a social justice class, and some of the students recognize me as one of those being interviewed and some don't.
Well, that's interesting. So why do you choose to share that sometimes and sometimes
Well,
you
it
don't?
depends. I don't feel I should begin, for instance, a class in Bible study telling students that they have a martyr before them. I just don't feel that's appropriate.
Right.
If it comes up to some extent, I share some of it and give some of the background and tell the story. I put the story much more cohesively together recently at Valparaiso University when I was invited to be part of their Martin Luther King commemoration than I would tell an ordinary class.
How did that experience kind of shape your leadership, you know, particularly for the immediate years after that? I mean,
well, I worked 4 years at Holy Name Cathedral after that, and about a year of that I was in a fog, still learning to walk and getting over what I now know to be post-traumatic stress syndrome. After another year, I thought I was going to return to the Black Catholic parish where I had worked, and was told I'd become too political, and that was not feasible.
so you were very political.
Well, was thought to be. So began to learn Spanish, visited a lot in the cathedral environs. There were still a lot of Mexican, Puerto Rican families along Superior Street and some of the other parts of that area, and began visiting homes, learning Spanish. Having learned Latin as a student in the seminary, it wasn't a great stretch to begin to learn Spanish. And learned Spanish enough in the next 2 years to be assigned to a Hispanic parish in the Humboldt Park area.
So what do you feel, if there was one message you were trying to give to people today about what you've learned in life?
Well, I think
what would it be?
To learn is how important it is to get out of your little cell group. You know, I try to tell students, for instance, to take advantage of those Eat Different days that are promoted, where around Thanksgiving you have students. Just to be open to those who are around you, to not just be so knit within your small peer comfort group that you don't appreciate those who are around you. And often in the mixed high schools these days, that's a great effort to get in cafeteria and other settings to listen to the other students, to maybe talk to other students.
back at the time, back in the 60s, that looks like a big risk you took. I mean, really stepping up, stepping into those kind of situations. Do you think there is still today those kind of opportunities for people to step up and really challenge what's going on?
Some of them are tragic. When I see the efforts of young women to go off to Syria, to think they're responding to needs and to poverty and to other things and to join ISIS, it's just that it becomes one of the alternatives for young people, that there are not more alternatives. I think in our country, some of the teacher projects that are going on, I think Notre Dame has done a wonderful job in the last few years of encouraging people who are not instantly employable to become teachers for a few years.
So what do you mean by...
And the volunteer kinds of efforts that are available through school.
So what do you mean by the young women who go off?
Well,
they're trying to
they're
help.
attracted, they're through social media and other media, that they're being told to respond to some of the same needs that I felt I was responding to. It's the
Injustice.
way, and it's the way in which they're responding that so troubles us.
That puts them in...
Them in harm's way, and perhaps to become our enemy when they thought they were going to try to respond to needs.
Does it still feel like to you that we've got so many social issues in this country?
I think so. Yeah.
And if you could start someplace, where would you start? Is there a place to start?
Today, I might be attracted to the environment. I remember in the late 60s being a little bit miffed that all of a sudden civil rights was being dropped and the environment was being chosen. Earth Day came in that time, and I thought, holy hell, history.
What a difference.
Yeah.
Pick up trash or save someone's life, right?
Well,
it didn't...
And yet, at this time, I see how much they're bound together. And I think of some of the deaths in Brazil of a Sister Dorothy Stang who was shot for trying to preserve the Amazon jungles for their natural use rather than just to make them all cow pastures for McDonald's and other large consumers of beef.
As you've taught and worked with particularly young people, but I'll even say under 40 or whatever, have you ever had those moments where you're talking to somebody and you just want to grab them and shake them and say, you just don't get it?
I think I've been more patient than that.
Okay.
I think people were more patient with me.
You never want to grab them and shake them?
Not generally, no.
So how do you think you get through to some of those
I think
people?
I get through to some and don't to others. I just take the opportunities. This particular time, the anniversary of Selma and some other events, for instance, it turned out that in doing the Valparaiso event that I happened to meet the daughter of a man with whom I'd worked with his students on the near north side when I was at Holy Name Cathedral. And
Do you ever feel, can you think of a time that you feel like you've really touched somebody to the point that they really stepped up and did something and you're like, wow?
There are a few. One of them, for instance, I was asking him to join us in Valparaiso, and he was unable to, but he mentioned how much working with me and meeting with me for perhaps a period of 3 or 4 years back in the early 80s had influenced his life.
And what had he gone on to do?
Well, he went on to do personnel work, but also to do tremendous work with the church reaching out to the poor in East Chicago and with people troubled with alcohol and other substance abuse.
So he's done some remarkable things then too.
In my view, yes.
Well, when you're helping somebody, it's pretty remarkable, don't you think?
Yes.
So what's still the challenge you feel like you're kind of grabbing a hold of right now? You're working in East Chicago.
The challenge is encouraging my son and daughter, my son who is a lawyer in Buffalo, New York, and probably soon to go to work for the city of Buffalo in a diversity office, to keep encouraging him to keep his eye on the prize, which I think he's had very well. He's now age 40 and has done a lot of interesting things in housing and community and as a kind of neighborhood lawyer. My daughter has done a lot of interesting things in terms of her work in Griffith in downtown Chicago. She worked at Calumet College for 2 or 3 years. And
so you're definitely proud of your kids, that's for sure. And that's,
there isn't a youth group I work with exactly these days. I at times try to be prepared to help and to carry that with my students, but I do it more with my students than with any for instance, church or neighborhood youth group.
Do you think this movie, Selma, is really going to have an impact or is having an impact on people?
Well, I hope it'll have an impact. I hope it'll at least revive a memory. The only point I made, I was interviewing it or reviewing it for an Italian Catholic newspaper. Got the review in Italian recently. Fortunately, I knew some to read it. But the sense of that institutional response, of it took those church leaders and synagogue leaders and Orthodox leaders a long time to come to the commitment they made in January of 1963, but they made it. They made that commitment. They followed through with it in Selma, and they followed through with it, unfortunately, more in the 20 years right after than they have since. Hopefully, the Pope Francis effect will revive the interest in church, not only in pro-life activities, but a lot of other social issues that very much affect our people.
Because the church definitely has a role in all this. You firmly believe
I
that.
firmly believe it. It certainly had affected me, and even to the point where in late January I'll be going to a couple of conferences at Notre Dame on the church in the modern world and what those challenges were and how we're trying to still respond to them.
Is there anything when you're teaching that you try to blend in that you think really helps people become more aware of what's going on?
Well, I try to find them, help them to find something before their eyes, something in their local community. There's usually a service component attached to the social justice class and some of the other classes that we try to help organize and help them to see and to respond. For instance, I had a couple of students had an experience at the Environmental Center in Hammond, and they came back very, very positive. One of them, her life changed.
So those kind of firsthand experiences really open people's eyes up.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely appreciate you being here and sharing this story with us so that the audience can pick up on it. I've always admired the work that you do and the leadership that you provide in our community. So thanks for being here today. And
well, thank you for having me.
We'll listen to this story again in the future.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Richard. For those of you who watch Lakeshore Focus regularly, you know that I end each show with a certain phrase, make a positive difference in our world today. During the month of March, you will meet 4 extraordinary people who have made that positive difference. One was our guest today. Every person has the opportunity to make an impact, but there are some whose breadth and depth of what they have done go beyond the average. I hope these interviews will inspire and motivate you to be one of those people who stretch past comfortable, reach beyond their grasp, and explore a road that few are willing to travel. I have a favorite plaque on my office wall that has these words: "Do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." Maybe that path is before you now, and it's your time to take that first step. We always appreciate you watching our show. For these next few weeks, I am going to make an appeal for you to send us an email. Not the usual notes on what you thought of the show, but that's okay too. What we want is this. We would like you to be part of a viewer group that would get regular emails from us about future shows, specifically ask for your ideas, and seek your feedback on topics and issues. Your responses might tie into the content of the show. Please email us today at focus@lakeshorepublicmedia.org. Write this address down now, or you may forget it. Remember, you will be part of a special group of viewers, and your input will be valuable to enriching this show. Don't forget that you can also visit our website where you can enjoy past Lakeshore Focus shows. Join us next week for another Lakeshore Focus. Until then, I'm Keith Kirkpatrick, reminding you again to make a positive difference in our world today.